Thank you all. We are so excited to be here today to share with you what we call the power of and, a new template for open source sustainability. I'm Alyssa Wright. I'm part of the Open Source Program Office at Bloomberg. At Bloomberg, we are an open source first company. That means that so much of our products and services are based on open source. And at the OSPO, we help to support our engineers be good contributors, participants, and leaders in the open source space. I've been in open source my entire professional career. I started 20 years ago in open source mapping and have been part of the boards of OpenStreetMap and currently serve on the board of Open Source Collective. So I have thought and talk about open source sustainability from many different perspectives and care about it very deeply.
And I'm Francesca Romano. I'm an open source newbie. This is my first open source conference, and I'm really, really excited to be here. Thank you. And a bit about me. So I lead global operations for Bloomberg's corporate philanthropy team. And Bloomberg, at its core, is a technology company. But it's also a company where philanthropy defines our culture and is embedded in absolutely everything we do. And so for me, when I look at open source, I see an opportunity to blend technology with social impact and effectively redefine philanthropy in an era that's driven by technology.
So whether this is your first open source conference or you've been here and you're an old hat, you might have keep hearing this term, open source sustainability. That's in part because the sustainability issues we're facing are not new. They've persisted year after year, often with significant consequences. These aren't isolated incidences. They are consistent challenges that expose why the current open source model may not be sustainable. So whether we're talking about abandonment, and volunteer burnout. Oh, sorry, is that the right? Mm-hmm. Oh, this is the wrong presentation. This is an older presentation. Oh, okay.
Just roll with it.
We'll figure it out.
We'll just put all of these in.
Whether we're talking about abandonment, which happens all the time, or security vulnerabilities, like you see here with Heartbleed, or burnout, maintainers get old and they maybe change their priorities, or supply chain attacks, where malicious code can create incredible risk, and funding failures, where maintainers need support and we are not there to be there. So we think this is where the power of and comes in, and there is an urgent need for a new approach. So to find a practical solution to this same crisis, different year, we must start with a clear definition of the problem. First, there's an unsustainable reliance on volunteers. Open source relies on a ton of visible labor. The consequences lead to burnout, fatigue, and declining participation. We exist in an ecosystem of fragile foundations. You may not see that or feel that with this incredible conference that's going on with the Linux Foundation, but so many of our open source projects rely on foundations that don't have the funding to think about the long term and sustain. There's unbalanced corporate engagement. So you might have saw the keynote yesterday. There's an incredible amount of benefit that companies get from open source. I think Frank put the statistic at $8.8 trillion. Yet we don't, as companies, always support open source beyond just charitable donations. And then there's a limited view of corporate responsibility. Sorry, in the other one, it's reversed.
Technical difficulties.
Yeah. So, there's a limited view of corporate responsibility, which means that oftentimes within companies, the business value of open source is in a separate space than what we think about philanthropy of open source. And these are siloed spaces, siloed departments that we think that really partnership is needed. So there is an urgent need for a new approach. We won't be the last presentation to do this, nor will this be the last time you'll see it. That there needs to be a new way of thinking about and framing both the problem and the solutions when it comes to open source sustainability.
So double click. So the question that we pose to all of you today, and what we really want you to think about as you listen to this talk, is what if the future of open source isn't about this choice between profit and purpose, but rather is about how we integrate those two things for the survival of the ecosystem?
So a little bit about what the talk is going to look like for the rest of the day, including technical surprises. First, we'd love to share with you how we see the business value of open source at Bloomberg and what it means when you bring philanthropy into that definition. Next, we'd like to talk about some of the programs that we've built together in partnership with the Open Source Program Office and Philanthropy. And finally, why combining philanthropy and open source is important to do now more than ever, especially in this world that we live in. So what is the business value of open source at Bloomberg? I want to put this all up. But the established wisdom, you heard it before, again in the keynote yesterday, it may be not well understood, but it is very well documented that there's an incredible amount of value that comes from open source, whether that means accelerated time to market, developer retention, our ability to innovate. There are so many direct and indirect cost savings that come from open source. But what if we also included public impact in that definition of business value?
So the established wisdom, keep going.
Yeah?
I think it's a different slide, but we'll speak to it anyway. The established wisdom might not label open source as philanthropy, but we ask why, because at their core, they're really both about the public good. And so when you view open source through a philanthropic lens, you're actually able to create new opportunities for meaningful public-private partnerships that can sustain and strengthen the ecosystem. And we have a really nice visual for that in the final version of this deck, which we are happy to email out after this talk. But to really drive that change, you have to shift the way you think about the world, and specifically how you think about corporate engagement. We see philanthropy and corporate social responsibility as the catalyst that enables us to make this change. And so philanthropy and corporate social responsibility significantly enhance the business value of open source by helping us move from a corporate engagement model that's very short-term and focused on transactional benefits to something that's much longer term and that focuses on genuine strategic investment in critical infrastructure. When companies are able to align their philanthropic and open source strategies, they unlock opportunities to amplify impact not only for the business, but also for society. Financial contributions will always be essential, but we really see the greatest opportunity to create lasting impact in strategically mobilizing, incentivizing, and empowering people. People are at the heart of open source. And so when companies support their people, their employees, and their contributions to open source, they're really supporting the overall community health by fostering long-term resilience and driving innovation. And this is what helps us to address those imbalances that Alyssa was talking about earlier.
So TLDR,
it's going to be really a roulette wheel in terms of what comes up on the screen. So just focus on the words. Focus on the words.
Public impact strengthens the business value of open source.
Your final PowerPoint is in the end.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
amazing.
Yeah.
Great.
So I'm going to put all 5 of these up here. But we looked at the business value of open source, like wavy thing before. Let's look at it through the lens of when you add philanthropy to that mix. So technology reliability. When we support open source ecosystem, we're building a healthier, more robust infrastructure that everyone benefits from. From the company perspective, that means technologies your company rely on inherently become more stable, secure, and long-lasting. This is also about risk mitigation. As we actively support critical open source is a direct investment in reducing systemic risk for the entire industry. But for your company, you're also investing in an insurance policy against security vulnerabilities, maintainer burnout, and abandonment that can severely impact your business operations and revenue. When it comes to product innovation, engaging in inclusive open source collaboration allows all of us to tap into a global wellspring of creativity for the public good of innovation. And from the business point of view, that means that we have access to a global pool of ideas, diverse perspectives, and rapid development cycles, leading to smarter, more competitive products for your customers. And talent growth. Open source inherently builds a powerful mentorship and learning network. What does that mean for the company? This helps you attract top new talent who are passionate about contributing, and it provides an unparalleled platform to develop skills for your current workforce. And finally, reputation. This goes beyond like putting a logo on a website or foundation engagement. This is about embracing a genuine philanthropic mindset and actively contributing to open source to create a powerful culture of giving back. This significantly enhances your company's reputation, not just in the tech community here, but also among customers and potential employees.
So philanthropy isn't just altruism, it is a strategic business imperative. And to bring that to life, what I want to share at a very high level is what we've done at Bloomberg. So first, we've deeply embedded philanthropy and corporate social responsibility into our open source strategy to create a culture of contribution, a culture of giving back that extends far beyond financial support. And for us, it's guided by our founder, Mike Bloomberg's principle that it's good for business because it's good for people. So the way we've thought about creating our joint philanthropy and open source programs is to specifically focus on people. How do you effectively incentivize them? How do you effectively mobilize them to give their time and expertise? And how do you leverage corporate resources in that process? At the end of the day, this is essential for our business. As Alyssa said, we're an open source first company, but it's also essential for the projects themselves, for other corporations, for the scientific community, for humanitarian organizations, for the entire open source ecosystem, and by extension, for society as a whole.
What's the next slide? Well, we're going to talk about what we've actually built in partnership with Open Source Program Office and Corporate Philanthropy. So we see ourselves in unique partnership. From the Open Source Program Office point of view, philanthropy really enhances the business value of open source.
And by including open source and philanthropy, we're not only expanding our impact on open source, we're really reshaping philanthropy through the lens of technology. And in the process, we're actually democratizing access to technology.
And since we're just improvising a little bit, I just want to say
Hope it's working. Keep going.
So adding philanthropy into the Open Source Program Office strategy has been transformative for OSPO. And what's interesting for me to understand and learn is that adding open source to the philanthropy strategy is transformative for the philanthropy as well.
That's right. All right. So partnerships rooted in philanthropy are, again, what are going to help us to move beyond the short-term transactional benefits towards sustained strategic impact. When companies integrate philanthropy into their open source strategy, as Alyssa was saying, it's creating new opportunities to invest in the long-term resilience of what we all know is critical digital infrastructure and invest in the overall health of contributor communities. Okay. Great. So how do we actually do this? How do we move beyond the transactional? The first thing that we have to do is shift the lens. By embedding open source contribution into broader community and volunteer programs, it demonstrates a genuine organizational commitment to social responsibility and public good. So as a reference point at Bloomberg, last year about 19,000 employees volunteered 191,000 hours of their time to nonprofits around the world. Not everybody has a lot of money to donate, but we have our brains and we have our skills and we have our time, and we have to think about that as a really valuable resource for open source. The second thing that we have to do is think long-term. And thinking long-term means making investments that support infrastructure maintainers and continually introduce new and more purpose-driven talent into the ecosystem. And I don't know if anyone went to the mentorship panel, but a key way to do this is by investing in a mentorship program that supports first-time contributors as well as engages ongoing contributions from more seasoned contributors. And then the final thing that we want to focus on is this idea of partnerships that we've spoken about a few times. So when you partner intentionally, philanthropy enables meaningful public-private partnerships between corporations, open source foundations, and community stakeholders. And just as we've seen the success of public-private partnerships in things like utilities, human services, even parks, applying a similar model to open source is what can help to deliver this more sustained support that we know the ecosystem needs in order to innovate, to reduce burnout and abandonment, and even unlock additional funding for projects and also for open source foundations.
What's next?
Great. So how did we build these programs? What are the things that we think are really essential so that it's not just all hype and talk? So when we think about a model that is successful, we think about how it addresses 4 key things: the project impact, the business impact, the participant impact, and the public impact. When we think about project impact, again, we're focused on ways to grow the user base and the recurring contributor base, as well as generate additional financial funding for the long-term viability of project-specific impact within the ecosystem.
When we think about business impact, we think about how does this work really influence our bottom line? Is it providing us a strategic advantage in the space? And how can this help to accelerate our product innovation? When it comes to participant impact, like, are we helping to grow the people that are engaging in these programs? Are we providing spaces for a more diverse and inclusive, like, open source environment?
And actually, I'm going to go off script for a moment and
Yeah,
go
'cause
back
you're
to
saying-
business impact, but mainly because so many people have been asking about it. And it seems to be this thing that we need more to be able to sell to corporations or foundations to drive more support. And so this is something that we're actively looking at. And if anyone is interested in following along on how we come up with defining this business value, please let us know, and we'd love to keep in touch. Back to the script, the final piece that we consider is public good impact. This is about improving quality, it's about improving reliability, it's about improving security for a healthier and more active community. It's about helping to contribute to the stability of the overall infrastructure and reducing the different systemic risks that have been talked about by a lot of presenters here and also by Alyssa earlier today. And then finally, it's about improving technology that ultimately benefits everyone.
And that's another version of that. So what have we built together when it comes to the Open Source Program Office and corporate philanthropy? First, we have a large portfolio of foundations that we help to support. I'm sure if you're coming from a company, you also have, like, that language, like, within your open source space. We see foundations as really an important part to the sustainability of projects. And we have a portfolio of about 25 foundations that we continue to invest our time in.
And we wanted to share some things that others have told us about our partnerships. And this particular quote is from Lauren Crary, who leads sponsorship for the Python Software Foundation. And what you see in her message is highlighting the tangible impact of corporate partnerships on strengthening the infrastructure across the entire open source ecosystem.
Another thing that we've built together is our FOSS Contributor Fund. This is something that are in other industries where we kind of empower our employees to help us direct where to spend and contribute funds.
And the quote you see here, I think it's important to think about Curl being a winner of our 2023 FOSS Fund grant. And we already knew that that technology was important to Bloomberg, but when our engineers voted to give them a grant, we also saw how important it was to them. And that's what this sustained philanthropic engagement, this integrated approach looks like. Things that are helping not only single corporations, but the long-term viability of open source. All right. So philanthropy can take many forms, and here we want to talk about individual contribution. One of the most impactful forms of volunteering is actually using your professional skills to give back. And at Bloomberg, we've expanded a program that we already had. It's called Dollars for Your Hours, and it allows our employees to convert the time they spend personally volunteering into contributions that are funded by the company. So we recognize contributing to open source outside of your job responsibilities as true volunteerism. And when you reach a certain number of volunteer hours, we make a contribution to the charity of your choice. We're letting people connect their own technical skills and giving back.
So a couple of comments or quotes from people that, engineers that we work with that contributed to these open source Dollars for Your Hours. One comes from Jason, who is a longtime contributor in the JavaScript community. And he says that contributing to open source projects was good, is a great feeling, and donating to other causes that he cares about. On the other side of the spectrum is somebody that was completely new to open source contribution, who through this program was able to contribute to GeoPandas. And we got to go to a conference where they presented his work and demoed it for everybody.
And as Alyssa mentioned, these two experiences are really on either side of the spectrum. You have seasoned volunteers, you have first-time participants, but you're seeing the same thread of those four things in what everyone was talking about. It's creating impact for the contributors themselves. It's creating impact for the projects. It's creating resilience for the broader ecosystem, and it's also good for the business, for the companies that are relying on these technologies in their own products.
And then the final program that we've done together is something that we call this is Open Source Sustainability Series. This is a team volunteering program where people come together with a core project and mentors both from the external community and internally community to contribute in an ongoing manner to the open source project.
And the quote you see on screen now, let's just make sure it's the same one, is from Will, who is one of our Pandas mentors during the Sustaining Open Source series. He's a core maintainer, and here he's emphasizing the importance of the structured mentorship, right? That is one of the reasons people sort of give up. They hit a roadblock. They don't continue. So it's not only about structured mentorship, but it's also about making the model more efficient and more effective for everyone.
So taken together, this is our and. It's a combination of contributing and supporting the foundations that help our open source ecosystem, but really also encouraging our people to be active contributors and leaders in the space.
And the final section of our talk is really on why that strategic imperative of doing good matters now more than ever.
Okay.
All right, we'll just jump ahead. That's okay. Roll with the slides.
Well, this is just recall, right? The business value, that philanthropy enhances the business value of open source. Again, whether that's risk mitigation, product innovation, talent growth, reputation. This is an important part of thinking about like the long-term effects of what open source is. So why now?
On the clock. All right. So there's an urgent need right now, as Alyssa just said, to embrace this philanthropic corporate social responsibility mindset towards open source. And there are four primary reasons for this. The first is an explosion of open source dependencies, and you've heard that throughout this conference. Open source currently underpins our financial systems, our public infrastructure, our essential services, but it is vulnerable because of aging and often burnt out maintainers, insufficient resources, and uneven corporate engagement. The second is that open source offers a blueprint for solving very complex global problems through transparency and collaboration. By integrating philanthropy into how we support open source, we're moving again from transactional relationships towards strategic, proactive investments that are fortifying the tools that we use before crisis hits. And then the third is really that history has repeatedly shown us that innovation accelerates in moments of urgency. Philanthropy, corporate social responsibility, acts as a catalyst to combine strategic business investment with purposeful social impact. The approach enables faster, more reliable scaling of solutions exactly when we need it. And then the fourth is really focused on the next generation of talent. And I'm not sure if anyone saw Abby's talk about Gen Z yesterday, but worth viewing afterwards. Gen Z is prioritizing employers who demonstrate a genuine commitment to social responsibility and meaningful community impact. For all of these reasons, and matters now more than ever because we want to break the cycle of different year, same crisis. And the ask of everyone in the room is to think about whether you can embrace this and approach and whether you can actually integrate philanthropy and corporate social responsibility into your own open source strategies or your operations as a way to create more sustainable, more resilient ecosystems.
So we encourage you to find your own partnership. We really see the value of open source and the value of philanthropy connected and can build with each other. So thank you.
That's it. You've seen several iterations of our slides, too.
So, yeah.
We wanted to leave time for questions because it is a little bit of a different model, so let us know. Yes.
So you talked about contributing funds.
So, sorry, there's a...
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You talked about contributing funds to a charity when an engineer in Bloomberg is contributing their time after hours. But are you also supporting any benefit to them contributing their time during business hours
Yeah.
on projects that aren't necessarily ones that directly impact the program that they're on.
Yes. Do you want to speak to this, or do you
Yeah,
want
and I
me
think
to?
you're actually talking to like a larger question of like what is volunteer open source engagement and what is work engagement. We have a number of people within Bloomberg that contribute to open source as part of their work priorities. But even if their job is like almost exclusively in like open source contribution like realm, there's so much other invisible work that may not be about like getting a feature included or working towards like a certain type of product launch. And we ask our, in those spaces, we ask our engineers to self-attest that this is a volunteer activity. Like, so a translation for a documentation or serving on the board for an accessibility council. Like, these may be projects that you use and work with and then contribute to for your work priorities. But we see that as like, volunteer efforts can also exist in the same spaces that you are involved in for your work priorities as well.
And as the second part of your question, yes, it can happen during the day. People take breaks. People need to recharge. That's okay. There is value for companies when people are allowed to give back and allowed to balance their traditional workload. Yes.
I have a question on kind of the reputation side between corporate, individual, and the team option that you mentioned. Have you seen any challenges from like a marketing branding perspective on how particular groups from a company would contribute to open source, either in the team setting or as individuals? I understand they're not representing the company, but inadvertently they kind of are.
So the question is, if I understand it, like how do people represent themselves in the open source community?
Or alternatively, how does the company, or does the company moderate any of the content that the individual contributors?
Yeah.
So I think that is a larger question also for your open source program office, who helps to like set the guidance for how you as a company and your employees should show up in these open source spaces. One of the things that we find valuable about having these sorts of volunteer programs like in the spaces is that it provides you opportunity, it provides employees and people who are interested in contributing the opportunity to learn best practices from each other and from other mentors and experts in the space. So particularly the team volunteering effort that we have, it's really important that those open source contributors are paired with core maintainers, both internally and externally. And we have weekly office hours where people are, I was actually surprised by this learning, but many of the questions are not about kind of technology questions. They're really about like, how do I understand like the lack of response to this PR?
Yeah.
It's really a human, how do I ask for people to look at this PR, So, and it's really the dynamics, like the human dynamics, that were a big portion of the learning that happened in the office hours.
And if you think about it from like the business side of the equation and marketing and reputation, in many ways this is safer. We did actually see someone who was a new contributor, and they reached out and were saying, why haven't you checked my pull request? What's going on? And because we had dedicated mentors who had done this before, they were actually able to step in and say, actually, here's how we do it. Here's how you think about going through a checklist before you submit a pull request. And so in many ways, you're creating a community that helps with those reputational elements. And when we look at people who are volunteering on an individual basis, there is this self-attestation and there is this disclosure of like, what are you spending your time on? And is it something that we feel good about? I think we're lucky at Bloomberg that we do have this culture of giving back and we do have philanthropy embedded in so many things. But from a reputational perspective, it's actually been very valuable to be able to bring more seasoned contributors together with new first-time contributors. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, great, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, lovely talk, and I appreciate Bloomberg's taking the lead on combining these two thoughts and ideas, and it's truly eye-opening to see this initiative. I've got kind of a strange question, but okay, I'm gonna come out and say it, the future of work, okay? Everyone's talking about the future of work. Do you see a future where you start to view software as being responsibly sourced or fairly sourced, the way you might buy sustainably sourced coffee beans? And would that then translate into giving preference to a software that's been transparently created through some sort of open source project? It's kind of I don't know if you get my gist here. Yeah. What I'm trying to say is here, it's not quite philanthropy, it's actually more strategic. And it actually comes right to the core question of, when you are looking to assemble any type of new technical initiative, do you have inside you, the build, folks in the company thinking about, or can you change hearts and minds inside the company in this way? Because I think that will maybe bring a third aspect, to this, and maybe add to this snowball and the flywheel in its own way.
So if I understand your question, I feel like you're asking, do we bring values into and have a sort of ethical?
It's actually it's less about so. I think what Bloomberg is doing right, of course, is encouraging the concept of giving back, both in terms of hours and contributions to open source projects. But I wonder if there's an additional step even beyond that, which is to say, well, we're actually going to source software for our purposes that we don't develop or own, that our employees have no connection with, and we'll give preference or an extra weight. We'll tip the scales. We'll put our thumb on the scales when we're doing evaluations. For software vendors, and maybe buy from vendors who are actually open source.
Well, I think that I wanted to say that one of the things that does matter to us, and we do weight, is open of itself. A fact that a project or is open matters in our technology evaluations that happen, and that we can see we can see where that project is going, who are the stakeholders there. Just the fact of being open source matters in our technology decisions. It's not we work with a lot of vendor software as well, but being an open source first company, openness in and of itself is a value that we consider. But I will say another thing that kind of came up in my head while you were asking the question is that I think as a way to evaluate some of these other values, or considerations when bringing in open source software, is also to look at the health of the open source software and getting metrics about, is this a healthy open source piece of project that we would want to bring in? Are there other risks that we need to actively work towards addressing in order to feel safe having it be part of our supply chain? So you probably bring
and from a philanthropy perspective, we can choose to put our dollars, we can choose to put our time anywhere. And so when we have those opportunities to figure out we're doing good, also makes strategic sense for the business because it's something we can use in our own products in our own company, we think that's a great thing. That's like the home run. That's how you have everybody aligned and running towards the same end goal, and that's like that true integrated approach we're talking about, which is you can generate public good while also be doing something good for your business. And I think that's the mindset. And so more questions like that, more debate about this, is I think how you refine the model and you actually figure out how to tell the story to different people within a company to help them understand the value. Because different people are going to look at it through different lenses. A lawyer is going to want to know why this is a less risky proposition. A CFO is going to want to know why this is a more financially sustainable solution. But I think the totality of the equation is that intersection of business value and public good. Does that answer?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Good. Okay, great. Oh, yes, we're going to get a tough one over here.
Hey, thanks for the presentation. That was great. I wonder if you ran into situations of conflict of interest, right? Somebody trying to contribute to something that's maybe not in the best interest of Bloomberg, or it affects IP Bloomberg has or something like that. How do you deal with that?
No, you can start if you want.
Sure. So we for every open source project, whether that's for work contribution or volunteer contribution, we do a risk assessment, and this is a combination of looking at both the legal requirements of the project as well as, to your point, like maybe potentially risk to the company's product direction. And so we do keep an active list both of projects that are low risk or established risk that people can contribute to, whether, again, it's in a business context or a volunteer context, and a list of projects that fall into this area of conflict of interest. And it's not too extensive, but there is a list that exists. And I would imagine that most companies have something similar. For our volunteer efforts, we prioritize contributions, and the process and flow for volunteer contributions are easier when you're contributing to a project that is hosted by one of the foundations that we are members of. So we're members of these 27 foundations. There are hundreds of open source projects that are hosted there. If somebody is requesting to do volunteer activity for one of a CNCF project, that is a very easy workflow as long as the right sort of approvals and attestations happen. If there's a project that falls outside of our foundation engagements, again for volunteer, we do both a technology and a philanthropy due diligence.
Yeah, and our philanthropy due diligence is pretty rigorous, and we apply the same model to the different open source projects we're looking at as we apply when we're looking at a more traditional nonprofit. And as part of that, we actually, and also in answer to your question from earlier, we are looking for alignment with our company values. If something doesn't align in the same way we wouldn't support it through our traditional philanthropic endeavors, we're not going to support it in this space either. But we're very cognizant that those two types of diligence are very different. There's technical diligence and there's diligence related to preserving our reputation. Because one false step in the space and one thing that's embarrassing, and I think this is what you were alluding to earlier, and all of that hard work, all of the thinking about the models and how you get people engaged, right, it disappears in the blink of an eye. And so we do take it really seriously when we're screening these organizations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have both a comment and a question. I'm not saying that you guys do this, but one thing that drives me nuts is when people from a big company post issues on our public mailing list or open issues in our GitLab, and they use a Gmail address instead of, so you can't tell what company they're from. And not only does it seem to me to be sort of unethical, but also you lose a lot of information because we have an idea. Because we have an idea, what your network is like, what your applications are like versus others, and we can draw inferences from that which are useful. But my other question was, there are a lot of things that you can do for open source projects besides give them money or volunteer. And one thing that is a big problem in open source is literally, I work for an organization that publishes open source. We have no idea who's using our software. So I'm just curious to know, if you were asked to list the open source that you use, would you be able to, and what would be your concerns or issues about that?
So to your do you want to answer?
I mean, I love this question. Alyssa and I have talked about it a lot. And yes, she, as our open source program office, can speak to the open source technology we're using, I guess for the first part of your question. Part of why we've embedded these in our volunteer and broader community programs is for that transparency. And it is saying that, yes, Bloomberg is supporting this. We are very transparent about where we're putting our time, about where we're engaging. There's no secrets there. I think the open source landscape is really, really interesting. And I've talked to 27 people about this. I don't know, making up the number. But at a top layer, at least from where I sit, it is easy to understand what some of those larger projects are. When you think, though, about those fragile foundations, and when you think about layer upon layer upon layer, I think there's an opportunity, and I think Alyssa would agree, we'd love to understand how those projects are being funded. How are those projects being staffed? Where is there opportunity for a corporation to come in and put more people or more resources behind it? And I think there are some organizations doing really interesting work in the space, but I think there's more that can be done. I don't know, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, plus 100 to all of that. And back to the kind of understanding of health, we are actively trying to build like a landscape of our open source technologies, not just at the high level, but throughout the dependencies, and understand like the health of those projects, and also direct our efforts, both whether it's the mentorship program or our FOSS fund or our foundation support, to the projects that would benefit the most from that.
Right, but really what I was thinking was that simply by letting the open source, maintainers know that you're using their software,
Yeah.
that's actually quite valuable to them.
Yeah.
And I always wonder if people are instructed to use an anonymous Gmail address in order to avoid revealing that, because
Yeah.
it's very frustrating as a maintainer.
Yeah, so to answer the latter question, which was your first question before, like our guidance and best practice is to be transparent about where you're coming from and visible. And I think that is generally like what most open source program offices recommend. But people come with like maybe prior reputations in a open source project, and so they continue to use their identity that they had before. But it is on them, and I think it is general best practice to be transparent about where you're coming from and what you're engaged, why you're there, and what your engagement will look like. And then also, you may be there for a very specific reason, and then you will take a step back after that work is done. And I think also being clear about when you're going to be there and when you're going to step away, and how people and a project can trust you is an important part to the work that we try to do at Bloomberg. But this is a little bit about the etiquette that we were talking about before, and what you can learn in a mentorship model, because people, I think, often don't realize what they're doing all the time. They're just trying to get their computer that may be like locked down for X, Y, and Z reasons to like be able to contribute to these spaces. So I think that learning from others, both that are internal to the community and that are maybe within your own company that have navigated these spaces, are some of the work that we'd like to be able to like build. I think we might be at time. Do you know when? Yes, time. Yes. Anyway, thank you.
All right, thank you so
very
much.
Thank you.